Our guest speaker today is Sara Johnson with the Audubon Society. And Alan, you're going to introduce her, right?
I certainly will. I'll be glad to. Sarah's a second-year master's student in a rare plant conservation lab at UIUC. She's been serving on the Champaign County Audubon Association board for the last 4 years, acting as president and now vice president. She has her own YouTube channel with maybe a half so different 5 to 10 minute vignettes that are just terrific. And if you're having a bad day, turn on Sara Johnson and calm you down with your able to look at the birds and the bees and the flowers. Sara, thank you so much for coming to our meeting today. Take it away.
Oh, that was so sweet, Alan. Thank you. At first I was like, oh God, he's talking about the YouTube. But no, that was perfect. Yeah, I came here in 2015. My boyfriend's a PhD student at NRES as well. And I really wanted to get involved in something, and the Audubon was a perfect place for me to get started. And it's been incredible. I've gotten to know this community so much. And I really love, I moved here from Buffalo, New York, and I was like a bleeding heart Buffalonian that like did not want to leave. And I've really learned to embrace everything that's a little bit different about being here. And I really love it. And one of the things that I love the most is highlighting the nature that is here. It's a little fewer and farther between, but what is here is really beautiful. And the people who devote their time to it, whether it be volunteering or preserving it, really, really care. And so being part of Audubon has been really great. We've done a lot of good things since I started a few years back. We've been trying to, thanks to Alan, spend some more money on some conservation projects and some other good deeds around town. And I've really enjoyed watching it grow. So if you guys have questions, this is obviously seems very casual, so feel free to ask, but I'm kind of just going to talk a little bit about, maybe if you're, into birding, or you want to get into birding, or you don't know why people bird, you say, like you said earlier, why do you get up early and go outside and look for birds? Maybe I can answer some of those questions. But how many people, I guess there's no way to really, you could raise your hand maybe, but how many people actually actively bird, like go out and go birding, or like use binoculars in your backyard to look at birds? Maybe like raise your hand, I guess.
Me.
Alan, okay, I got a couple hands. Okay, so let's get.
Does chasing geese count?
Yeah, sure.
Technically, yes.
You're observing their behavior, so sure, I guess so, right? So a little bit about the Audubon. It started as a birdwatching club in 1940 and became a chapter of National Audubon in 1945, I believe. And so now we have over 500 members locally. And, obviously things are a little different right now. We're not doing scheduled programming. We're not doing our regularly scheduled walks, but we're hoping that, based on how things go, we may be able to reintroduce some of these programs in the fall. But primarily what we do is provide opportunities for learning, for outreach, for volunteer opportunities, and then also we offer some grants for educators, for students that are doing ornithological research in the area, and then trying to fund different conservation projects. Like the Point Pleasant wetland, for example, out near Middle Fork, we helped fund, with the help of National Audubon, some of the restoration that's going on there. So that's most of what we do. We, of course, welcome any membership or participation. So if, you have an area of expertise, whether that be outreach or working with kids or whatever, you're welcome to join in on a board meeting when those come back, hopefully in the fall. So let me try, there we go. So you probably want to try to get into birding, or you want to learn a little bit more about birding, and you're wondering, why do people get up early? Why do they go out and bird? What is in it for them? What interests them about birding? And really, I think there's a lot of reasons to this. I think the number one reason birding is so wonderful and so well loved is because it's really accessible for everybody. It's accessible for all abilities, for all ages. Um, you know, paved trails. The fact that this is some of the only places that are open right now, while we're in this weird state of the union, you know, I think it's really brought a lot of people outdoors and wondering, you know, what else they can get involved with in their natural community, and trying to find some peace of mind during all of this is part of why birding is so huge also. And you know, some birding does require travel, but most birding can be done from a chair in your own backyard or from a local park. And I think a lot of people find once they get into birding that it's really hard to stop, because it becomes kind of like a scavenger hunt. You know, you learn one bird, and that's kind of like your gotcha bird. You're like, oh wow, this is really interesting. Or in, I think your name's Scott, you know, Scott's case, he said something about crows being maybe not his favorite, but maybe that still interests you, and you say, I want to learn a little bit more about why they behave the way that they do, or why they scream at me from the tree, you know, every morning. And so the options kind of become endless. It becomes travel, destination. You know, you get to learn so much more about your local community and your local, you know, natural areas. And I think it's also, for some people, a really good motivation to get outside and get moving. You know, personally, I have a chronic illness, and I get sick every few years, kind of unexpectedly. And for me, it's a really calming, you know, thing to just have that stability to just go outside, sit, be quiet, be, you know, in a comfortable place and look at birds. And it's really helped me meet a lot of other people also. And I think once you start, it's just like an insatiable curiosity. Like I said, it's like a scavenger hunt. You learn some things, and then you want to learn more. And it's so great to be part of a community where people are actively trying to help you learn birds, you know, co-actively work together to try to find birds and look for them. And on the left here is two of our board members, Beth Chato, who's been keeping long-term records for the society for over 75 years, I believe. I don't know if she personally has been doing that record keeping the whole time, but our Sunday morning bird walks occur at the Crystal Lake Park and Busey Woods area. And so those bird records of every bird that's been seen on a Sunday morning bird walk have been kept for 75 years, which is not only great for this area, you know, it's really important for that long-term trend assessment of how bird populations are doing. For example, when I first moved here, I asked Beth about tufted titmice, because where I'm from, they're very common. And I hadn't really seen them much here. And then all of a sudden, or at least in town, and Beth had a, you know, of course, right off the top of her head, oh yeah, you know, I've seen a trend that they kind of weren't here for about 30 years. And then they started, you know, revisiting Busey Woods, and now they're fairly common again. And it's like, it's just amazing to know the wealth of knowledge that's within the people that have participated in this group. And for me, it's been a really great way to meet new people. Our age demographic does tend to be on the retired or older side, but we are finding that we're starting to get more interest from, you know, college age students. We don't have a lot of kids programming, which we would really like to develop, but we just haven't had anyone who's really has the time to devote to it. But what's really wonderful about this group and about a lot of groups like this is that you meet people from every area of life that you can imagine, you know, from engineers to mathematicians to, you know, what we would consider, you know, essential service workers. It's just like every single person that you can imagine gets into birding, and people from all over the world. It's really a very cool community that has a lot of people that bring lots of different ideas to the table. And I think it's just a really, normally a very kind and collaborative community. So it's getting each other outside, enjoying that time outside. And one thing I always appreciated is the older members are always really thankful to have the younger members, because they can hear the birds that they can't, and then, you know, saying thank you for your eyes and thank you for your ears. and that's how I got into birding. Was I went out on wellness walks with you know, kind of like the 70+ crowd when I was at a local nature center in Buffalo, and they were so grateful to have me because I could point out the birds, and I was learning so much because they had, you know, decades of knowledge of which bird was which, and so I learned really, really quickly. So it's just been a wonderful experience for me, you know, to get into birding and engaging with a lot of people in town. I've met a lot of wonderful people that way. And of course, obviously, birding's wonderful for your wellness, physically and mentally. You know, like I've already mentioned, for me, it's really meditative. I don't really necessarily find myself being a meditative or calm person. And for me, gardening, being outdoors, birding, it's a focused task that's really good for my mental health. But it also gets you out and moving. You know, you find yourself walking a lot further than you imagined because you're trying to find or track a bird. It keeps your senses sharp. You know, you're working really hard on tuning that that ear for sound and trying to differentiate different sounds. You're learning by paying attention to sight and patterns on that bird. And I think it's great because it can be modified. So as you age or as you change physically, you know, you can change this activity to really adapt to whatever it is you need, whether that be traveling or not, or if your physical ability changes. It's just a really great, it's a great hobby for many different reasons. And lastly, and kind of the most important in my opinion, is it really encourages this nurturing and caring about the environment, especially locally. I've always been a believer that, you know, wherever you are, you should be. And moving here, again, there's some things that I loved and didn't love about this area, and being part of the local group community, and especially an outdoors community, has kind of put me in it, you know, helping with volunteer projects, helping with restorations, and you learn who's involved with what, who to collaborate with. It's been really crucial to me accepting and you know, integrating into a new community. And I think if you move somewhere, you know, getting involved in a local group like you guys are and getting to know people is the best way you can really immerse yourself in whatever place that you're living. And for me, this birding community, getting out and doing volunteer work, getting to know people that are doing research, who's doing these restoration projects, who manages these properties, has really been able to get me out, learn about the native plant communities, learn about the birds that pass through here and depend on this flyway during their migration. And it helps influence the way that you vote. It helps influence the way that you care for this area. And I really think that that's the biggest part about birding for me is, you know, becoming more involved in your community, making a positive change locally or globally. And so that's some of my top reasons for getting into birding. So you go to the internet and you say, I want to get into birding, but I don't really know where to start. Let me see if I can get these videos to play. Maybe not. So this is one of my favorite videos. Oh no. Okay, well you guys can look it up on YouTube. It's a woodcock or a timberdoodle, which is a native, basically a snipe, dancing. It's not really dancing. It's doing its like little mating dance. It's very cute. And
like the one reading newspaper there.
Oh, I don't know if you guys can hear it, but this is a seagull doing the maniac dance. So anyway, there's a lot of information. My point is there's a lot of information on the internet, and you're like, you know, you go on and you're like, what about birds? I want to get into bird watching. And there's just so much information, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. You know, sometimes there's a lot of wrong information or a lot of inaccurate information, but there's also a lot of funny stuff out there too. So what do you need as like an essential basis to like get into birding? I would say the number one thing you need is a good pair of binoculars. You can rent them from the Anita Purvis Nature Center. So if you come on one of our bird walks, you can actually rent a pair for free to take on the walk. But there's obviously a lot better pairs out there. If you have questions about those, I can answer that later. But the binoculars are going to enable you to see a lot further than your eyes are going to see. And they're pretty much essential. Getting a really good field guide. You know, there's a lot of apps, there's a lot of miscellaneous stuff out there, but I still believe that the paper is the best. You know, you have it in your hand, you can see, especially if you get something like, I always recommend getting an illustrated guide, not a photographic guide. Photographs can dissuade you a little bit. You know, you see different color or different patterns in a photograph than you do in a sketch. And Sibley's Birds is definitely the number one, in my opinion. You can get it for the East, the West, or the entire United States. And the thing that you get with the illustrations that you don't get the photos is that variation throughout the year. So especially with our migratory birds that change their plumage different times of year, you're going to see that a lot clearer in an illustrated guide, in my opinion. There's also usually really good descriptions, which help you learn what different behaviors or what different habitat these birds are in. And those are kind of the biggest tips to getting into, you know, learning a little bit more about these birds just than what they look like or sound like. Some of the apps, or Cornell Lab of Ornithology, for example, they do have a bird guide that I do recommend as like a supplement, because say you, you know, say you want to look up a bird, you can actually listen to its sound. You can look at a range map. There's no real easy way to backwards search. So I hear a lot of people, this happens to me all the time, where people send me recordings of bird songs, which doesn't usually work very well, but it's because there's no real way to reverse search for a bird call, right? You're like, oh, it sounds kind of like doo doo doo, and I'm like, great, cool. So does 100 other birds. It's hard to do. So it's really just like training, you know, and every time you see a bird, what helps me is I see that bird and then I listen to the sound, and then I create that connection in my head of the visual and the sound. And that's another, you know, kind of key to learning. So a good app that, or website that allows you to look up those sounds, a good field guide is something good to have with you. Also, a lot of, another app that's really great is eBird. It helps you keep track of the birds that you're seeing. So once you get better at identifying the birds, you can log them in your list, and then it keeps basically a life list, or a list of the birds that you see at different locations. And it also, of course, goes into this huge repository database that is good for long-term tracking of bird populations. People actually do check it to make sure that it's accurate. So it's a really worthy cause to keep track of birds yourself, and also just to help with that long-term data. And right now I'm the top birder at Sangamon River Forest Preserve, not because I bird there a lot, but because not a lot of other people bird there. So you could be locally famous like me and go be a top birder on an eBird list, if that's something you're into. The other thing that I think is crucial to like getting into birding is recognizing habitat and what's good and what's not good habitat. I have a lot of people who ask me, I have a bird feeder up in my backyard, but I don't get any birds and I don't understand why. And the most common reason is because it's a bird feeder in the middle of a basically vacant backyard. If you have no habitat or cover or shelter or the things that animals and wildlife require, it's going to be a lot more challenging to attract birds to that area. Just food alone isn't enough motivation, especially this time of year when they have a lot of other things to worry about. So recognizing what's good and what's not as good habitat for birds is going to be helpful. You want to have food, water, and shelter, of course, the three basic needs. And if you have those things, particularly you're fostering gardens for wildlife, so you're introducing a lot of beneficial insects, or insects that you know, are going to help build that food chain. That's what birds feed their young this time of year. They feed them insects, and so we may not like them, but they're critical to basically the entire food chain. So if you're encouraging that in your own backyard, you're going to have a lot more variety of bird life. You know, we see quite a lot of birds in our backyard, and we do have house wrens that nest every year, and the amount of cabbage moth caterpillars they take off of my brassicas is very helpful, that they feed their young. So, you know, I'm grateful for them. Lastly, you need some patience to get into birding. I think a lot of people start birding and they get a little discouraged because there's so much to learn, or they feel like maybe they are not quite figuring it out quick enough, or they are having trouble with using binoculars. And it's really just, again, take it as a slow hobby. It's something you get into, and maybe you don't particularly like travel birding. You just want to sit in your yard and enjoy the birds. I think that's a great thing, and I think it's a good way to start learning quickly. You're looking at the same resident birds regularly. You're learning about their behaviors, what they look like, and I think that's just as good as going out and going hiking to look for birds as well. So, I have mentioned backyard birding. Having a feeder definitely helps. I think what's cool is just inviting other people over, having friends. You guys could do a morning, you do this for the meeting. You could have it set up. You guys sit in someone's backyard and watch the bird feeder. Why not? Have your coffee while you're looking at the birds. Having bird baths, bird feeders, shelters, places that birds can, like particularly my yard is open mostly in the middle. I have a small rain garden. I have a vegetable garden in the back, and then the borders of my yard is where I have all of my plantings. So we have native plants in every corner of the yard pretty much. And we have a mulberry bush and some other things along the back fence, a compost pile, which is super popular because it has a lot of flies and insects, and the birds get in there and they eat. We have a big brush pile. That's another great place for the birds to hang out and shelter. So all of these things in combination make it a good habitat for the birds. The tall trees, the short shrubs, the native plants full of insects, bird bath, bird feeder. This time of year, birds don't visit the feeder quite as much because they're busy feeding their young. They're not eating seeds, but they still will visit it. And one cool thing that we have introduced to our yard that can make this a little bit more exciting is we have a trail cam. Now, you can get trail cams really cheap these days that are fair quality. And this picture on the bottom left shows a really cool trail cam that you can actually hook up to your bird feeder. It's like a fisheye lens that takes pictures of the birds that are at your feeder. We don't have anything that advanced. We just have a regular old trail cam that we hook up to a log, and we move it around the yard to see what's coming in and out of the yard. We've caught a lot of possums, lots of possums, tons of possums. There's a lot of possums in the neighborhood. I haven't really caught any raccoons, surprisingly, or foxes, but I know that they're in the area. And it's just been really fun to kind of watch the interactions. And I did put a video in here for you guys. So this is from last year or the year before. This metal tray used to be a bird bath, and now it's has rusted holes in it, so it's a bird feeder. But you can see this edge of my garden with some of the plants. There's lots of cover. They feel very safe here. And these are just an example of some of the interactions that we get to watch. House sparrows with the cardinal, and some of the small aggressions that you see. And we have tons of videos like this, just like squirrels doing crazy acrobatics. It's just fun. It's fun to watch what's happening in your own backyard. And we catch a lot of fun little interactions, especially during the winter when there's not a lot else going on. Seeing the birds at the feeder, it really brightens your day, and it just helps you have that sense of place with where you're at and learning about what's around you. So enough about that. Quick, I want to show you some of the birds you might see in this area, and what you might attract by having different habitat or different food in your yard. Actually, let me go back. So some of the seed-eating birds you might find, this is a migratory bird called a rose-breasted grosbeak. You can see by the red breast. And the grosbeak is, it's a finch relative, and so it has that beak specifically for cracking seeds. It's a very strong beak. I have been bit by a cardinal while bird banding before, and it is truly insufferable. They are fierce little birds. Tufted titmouse, that's what I was talking about earlier when I said Beth has been tracking those populations. So tufted titmice tend to like areas with, you know, a lot of seeds also. So different types of trees are more attractive to them than others. But this is a bird that I always remember growing up at my grandparents' house. They had tons of titmice in their woods. American goldfinches, they actually breed in the fall, so they prefer a seed-based diet, and so you'll see that they're actually starting to breed now instead of earlier in the spring like most birds. But they, for example, have been all over my service berry for the past couple weeks, eating the seeds and berries. A blue jay, everybody loves blue jays, or hates them because they're noisy and keep them up every morning. They prefer peanuts or big seeds, but they'll be attracted by fruit in your yard as well. One of my favorite birds is the chickadee. We have two types here. What's really cool about this area is we're actually in a hybrid zone for chickadees. So if you look at the range map, black-capped chickadees are more northern species, and Carolina chickadees are more southern species. And we're in a zone where they exactly overlap. And so we actually get hybrids between the two types of chickadees. So often when you see one, it's going to be hard to tell unless you can hear their call, which they actually mimic each other as well. So it's kind of tricky. But there's just such a cute little bird. I love him. This is a white-crowned sparrow. There's a lot of different sparrows, and some of them are more distinct than others. A lot of people you hear call them little brown jobbers because they all kind of look the same. But you know, some of them have more distinctive patterning than others. And fortunately, names are not very creative for birds, and so I find that it helps you learn them a lot quicker, that they have these kind of generic descriptive names, like a white-crowned sparrow. This is a white-breasted nuthatch, which is a kind of like a type of woodpecker. They function as a woodpecker essentially, and they're resident birds also. Most of these birds are residents that you'll see all year round. They're pretty popular at feeders. Purple finch. We also have house finches that are very similar in color. They don't have quite as much purple red on them, but they're pretty common at my backyard bird feeders. And of course, our state bird, the northern cardinal, which is got that similar beak to the grosbeak. It's very fierce, and they like eating all the seeds at your bird feeder. So a lot of people don't think of fruit and nectar eating birds. You know, you think of hummingbirds, but there's a lot of other birds that also eat fruit and nectar. So let's see. We've got the Baltimore oriole, which is another migratory favorite. People put out oranges and grape jelly for them, but they most commonly like the flowering trees in the spring. You'll see them up in the tops of cherries and apple trees because they're actually eating the nectar out of the flowers. And some birds actually eat the flowers as well. And they're still in town. I saw one yesterday at Sangamon River Forest Preserve. So I saw a pair. So they do breed here. And they have these really, really intricate nests that are kind of like, I guess they're like a hanging basket almost, if you want to think of it. They weave it and it just hangs down from the tree. It's really unique. Bottom left here is a yellow-bellied sapsucker. So again, we don't really think of sap as nectar, but it totally is. You know, they drill the holes in the tree and eat the sap. This is a Cape May warbler on a pawpaw flower. Pawpaw flowers actually don't produce nectar. They're beetle pollinated or fly pollinated. Ruby-throated hummingbird, our only hummingbird in this area, feeding on a native columbine flower. Robins, they are huge fruit birds. They actually are not migratory. They're latitudinally migratory. So they follow each other in troops to different areas where there's lots of abundance of fruit and seeds. They don't really travel north and south very much, but that's why sometimes people think of them as returning in the spring. Really, they've just been traveling around looking for different food sources. Yellow-rumped warbler is one of our longest lasting neotropical migrant warblers, and they're actually eating poison ivy berries in this picture. So something you think may not be very palatable is actually great for birds. So poison ivy, who knew? Doesn't affect birds. Eastern towhee, eating serviceberry, which I've talked about quite a lot. It's a great food plant for birds, and they're just really neat little birds that I like to see. And cedar waxwings, another favorite people typically love. They're they're another type of bird that kind of travel in groups and go to look for abundance of food. So you'll see them fly into a tree, they pretty much demolish it, eat all the berries, and then they leave, which is pretty fun. And then this time of year, like I said, birds are primarily feeding their young insects. They're protein and fat rich, and that's what's going to feed them on their long migration. You know, they are feeding all summer long while they're using lots of energy. Then typically in the fall, they'll switch over to seeds that are more abundant. That gives them lots of fat reserves so that they can travel or they can survive the cold winter months. Also enables them to cache a lot of food so that they have it over the winter. This guy here is a house wren. What I have quite an abundance of in my yard. They are very noisy. They wake me up every single day at 4:30 in the morning, calling incessantly for at least 2 hours. You learn to love them, but they are a little bit, they're a little bit noisy. But they take care of a lot of my insects. On the bottom is an eastern kingbird. This is a favorite loggerhead shrike. They impale their insects on barbed wire and different spiky objects, and they will save them for later. So they're fierce little birds, aggressive predators, and they help take care of a lot of the insects that we have as pests. So pretty cool birds, especially in agricultural areas. Northern flickers, they're ground feeders. So you'll see them on the ground flipping over leaves and material looking for insects. Gorgeous woodpecker. I mean, the coloration on them is truly fabulous. And one that you don't see as much as I wish you would, because the color is just really amazing on them. Here's a summer tanager. They're, again, another migrant that comes through from Central and South America, heading up north to breed. There was a couple on our bird count this year. Chimney swifts, which you probably see in town. They do live in chimneys. They have really unique lifestyles. They are declining, so there's been some research that we've helped fund in the past, trying to figure out why they're declining and how to build better habitat for them. But they catch birds insects mid-air while they fly. They're really, really incredible birds. Oh, and then this isn't a bird. This is an Indiana bat. I think it's important to note that as you build habitat, you're not just looking to build your bird community. Things like Indiana bats, which is a threatened and endangered species in the state, really benefit from that habitat as well. And they are the ones that are taking care of the majority of your mosquitoes. So we should all be thanking them. And they're cute in their own little way. I really love bats. So if you want to encourage some of this habitat in your yard, you know, here's this example of some of the plants that you can plant, some native plants. The white oak is our state tree, and it's one of the best species for insects. It hosts over 150 different types of species of insects, from leaf miners to moths to beetles. It provides incredible habitat. A lot of these produce fruits. Virginia creeper is gorgeous. You can't eat those fruits. Don't eat them. They're poisonous. But elderberry, serviceberry, a lot of other native shrubs you can eat. And so I always recommend, you know, providing something for the birds, and maybe you get a little bonus out of it too. This is an example of one of the types of wasps that creates galls on white oaks. So galls are these weird formations that insects lay eggs in the tissue of the tree, and then forms basically a little nursery for their eggs to live inside of. So a lot of birds will actually find these galls and eat them, and eat the larva out of them. But many of them survive, of course. And I just like that. It's called a hedgehog gall. So you guys have probably seen these on plants before, these little weird bumps and nodules. Well, inside of those, it's a little insect nursery. So where all the babies hang out until they emerge. And I can't remember the name of this moth right now, but another beautiful little moth that depends on white oaks. I'm running out of time, but I got a couple more slides. So these are some other flowers I have in my rain garden that are really good for different plants or different insects and birds. Cardinal flower, turtlehead is the host plant for the Baltimore checker spot butterfly, which is an endangered species. Monarda fistulosa, which is all over the prairie, has a bee that is specialized for those types of flowers. It's actually named after the Monarda, Dufaria monardae. So there's so many cool different interactions you start to see when you look at the native plants that we have in our area. These are some of the most common ones you can find at nurseries: prairie blazing star, goldenrod, butterfly milkweed, and coneflower, all great pollinator plants, all good seed plants also. Here's some of the really cool insects that I've seen on mine. This one at the bottom is really important. This is a syrphid fly larva. So if you guys don't like aphids on your plants, if you encourage syrphid flies, these syrphid fly larvae just eat all of the aphids, no problem. They just devour them. So it's good to introduce some of these beneficial bugs into your yard because they'll take care of the pests that you don't want. So some examples of places to bird. There's lots of places within the Urbana Park District: Robert Parker and Bulware Trail, Busey Woods, Meadowbrook. Of course, there's lots of options. The Champaign Park District has many as well. Champaign County Forest Preserves, Buffalo Trace Prairie, Sangamon River Forest Preserve, Middle Fork. You know, there's tons of locations to go birding and to get outside. Also, of course, Allerton, the Kickapoo Rail Trail, Lodge Park, Heron County Park in Danville is really cool for some of those secretive marsh birds you don't usually see. One of my favorites is Fox Ridge State Park and Warbler Bottoms, which is a new acquisition from Grand Prairie Friends that's really, really becoming a wonderful place to hike. So if you guys are inspired and you want to get into birding, you know, hopefully this encouraged you to check out the birds in your backyard and maybe build some habitat for them in your yard too by planting some native plants. But our membership fee is so low, and we keep it low for that reason. We want more people to feel like it's accessible to them. We do put out monthly programming, monthly newsletters. We've done trivia events. We've done coffee time where we, you know, get out and go birding together. We even have a bird sit. So if you're not interested in walking around and birding, you can just come and sit and have coffee and bird with us. We do field trips. We go see the sandhill cranes at Jasper Pulaski in Indiana every year, which is an incredible event. You see over 80,000 sandhill cranes sometimes at a time flying in the evenings to roost. We just have a lot of great programs that hopefully we can start again soon. In the meantime, I do have, like Alan said, some videos up on our YouTube channel, and I have 2 recorded webinars on the Champaign County Audubon YouTube that I would be happy to send you guys. One, Gardening for Wildlife, which talks about what you can plant in your yard to encourage wildlife in your yard, and then also another version of this presentation about getting back into birding. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, let me know and I'd be happy to answer them for you. And I appreciate you guys having me. It's been great.
Thank you. Sarah, I do have a question. Some of these birds, like robins and blue jays, they don't migrate, they stay around. So how do they survive the harsh winters?
Yeah, it's really incredible. They change their habits so that they can stay warm and so that they can store a lot of food. So blue jays, for example, have been known to single-handedly repopulate areas with oak trees just because the sheer amount of oak acorns that they cache. So they'll put them somewhere like in the ground or in the base of a tree or wherever, and then that acorn will sprout. And so they really are good at storing food. So they'll store a lot of seed for the winter. They use that as a reserve, and they put on a ton of fat. And chickadees, for example, will roost in like the hole of a tree. They'll roost in groups so that they have collective warmth. And a lot of birds can slow their metabolism so that they can preserve energy during the coldest parts of the year. So they'll slow their heart rate overnight so that it's very low, and then they save that energy up, which is why in the winter especially it's really good to put out extra food just to help birds through the tough part of the year.
I always wondered how those little bony feet don't freeze right off in the middle of January.
Yes, well, they actually, they're able to reallocate how much blood they put into different areas, and it's essentially like they call it torpor. You know, they go into a really chill state for the night where they're able to, you know, focus that energy in the parts of their body that need preserving, and then, you know, keep the rest of it essentially quiet until they wake up again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Sarah, I've really benefited from going to the bird walks and just following Brock around on those days and being able to learn about bird calls and see all kinds of unique species there at Crystal Lake and BC Woods. And then one of the other things that opened up a whole new world to all the birds that are here was BirdNotes. And you didn't mention that. I don't know if you want to mention that.
Yeah, sure. BirdNotes is, so if you go to our website, which is champaignCountyAudubon.org, which I recommend everyone does just to look at it. We have a lot of resources on there. And one of the resources is you can sign up for a mailing list that Jared's talking about called BirdNotes. And now I'm going to warn you, it is a double-edged sword because you will get you will get a lot of emails, but you are able to sign up for a digest if you want, which sends you only one digest of the email listserv a day, which is what I do. And it's a collection of basically bird alerts. So if there's a rare bird sighting in the area, so for example, there was a black-necked stilt a few weeks ago that I didn't unfortunately get to go see out at one of the Fluddles out near like Curtis Road or something like that. And it tells you basically like a location, a general location of where you can see that bird. And then you can go out and try to find that rare bird. During migration, a lot of people say, oh, I saw my first ruby-throated hummingbird of the year, or, you know, different events that are going on, different articles that may be of interest, they'll be sent to you through this listserv, and you can sign up for that through our website. You can also sign up for the e-newsletter and the e-news that I put out via email. You know, I don't send them out very frequently, at least this time of year, but you can sign up for that on the website, and you don't have to be a member to sign up for it. Although again, membership's pretty cheap. So if that's of interest to you, you know, there are some benefits. We do have some member only programs when we're in normal programs, but yeah, the BirdNotes is a really cool resource, especially if you're just getting into birding. So any other
Sarah?
questions? Yeah.
From one Johnson to another, thank you very much. Great presentation.
Oh, thank you so much.
We have some friends who are birders, and we're finding out there are about as many species of birds as there are Johnsons in the world.
That's true.
My wife and I have been very fortunate through these friends. They recommended, as you mentioned earlier, Heron Cove.
Oh yeah.
Bill, we were there yesterday morning, and we were so surprised. We knew we would see herons. We were hoping to see herons, which we did out on the boardwalk, and it's a beautiful place just to walk. And also, right across the street is the trail. So we're walking on the trail, and we see a couple of sandhill cranes and a baby.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
And a lot of other bird species out there, and it's only about a 45, 50-minute drive from here. It's a beautiful area, beautiful walk. And having seen a video of Jared's, I think about a week ago, we went out to Middle Fork, and along one of the trails there, we saw a bald eagle.
Oh, awesome.
A huge nest up in the tree, just amazing.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure.
Larry?
That's great. Yeah, it's a great place to go. I miss a lot of, so because I'm from Buffalo, New York, we're on Lake Erie. And one thing about moving here that was really, 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 really tough for me is the lack of water, you know, not having a lot of lakes and streams and other waterways. And so that, yeah, I went there recently and saw a lot of the birds that I hadn't seen in a few years because we just don't have that marsh habitat anymore. It's a good place to go birding for sure.
Thank you.
Sarah, thank you. I think we're have to wrap up because people probably have to get going.
Well, feel free to give my contact either through Audubon or whatever, and the people can get in touch.
And I should have asked before, we've been recording our speakers and posting them on our YouTube channel. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Before we totally wrap up here, a quick quiz. Scott, where is the meeting next week?
Wait a minute. Give me a second. Denver Garden.
I was going to say, I even know that.
Okay. and Kevin, Keith, what time is the meeting?
Oh, Keith is muted. Keith's on a boat. He doesn't have time for this.
Let me think.
Don't too hard.
Is it too early for you, Keith?
Well, I've been sailing.
Okay.
Okay, Jared knows, I bet, what time the meeting is.
6:30 p.m. and bring your umbrella for sunlight.
There we go.
There you go.
Bring your umbrella, your own lawn chair, and we're going to pass the gavel and also welcome Jared as a new member. And also, I got in the mail a little recognition thing for a member I'm going to share. So,
Okay.
and for other folks, I'll have my iPad up on a little light stand, and we'll stream it to Facebook so everyone can follow along.
Daryl, do we get to do the virtual hazing ceremony?
Virtual hazing.
Oh, we quit doing that. That's right.
Well, Scott.
Yeah, sure. We quit doing that.
Scott, the way we virtual haze someone is to make them the president-elect.
That's wicked.
Is that right, Eddie?
We've never done that.
All right.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And I won't say filling in because he's a master in his own right, but Paul's going to give us a thought for the week.
Sure, Daryl. Since this is your last meeting capping a magnificent year as president, really,
Tough act to follow.
Daryl's reign of terror was wonderful.
Yes, sir.
I thought I would end this year for you, Daryl, by paraphrasing Ellen Funt's sign-off to his reality TV show. And it goes like this. So whether you're out shopping at the mall, going to the movies, or just relaxing at the cafe after a day at work, don't be surprised if sometime, somewhere, someplace, when you least expect it, Daryl steps up to you and says, "Smile, you're on Candid TV."
That's great.
Very good.
Those of you of a certain age.
Okay, and Mary, you will really enjoy doing this the end of each week. Great week, Sunrisers.
Yeah, thank you. That was marvelous.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great.
Thank you, guys.